Hi friends. I had a comment from user Lucy Young asking for a couple more examples of this sort of distinction between being nice and being kind, drawn from my life. So thought, hey, awesome. Opportunity for more content. So let's tell some stories. Now this is a difficult question for me in that I am known to be sort of the longest form possible storyteller. So I have to try to distill some stories down to sort of bare bones in order to get them across in a reasonable amount of time and actually highlight the issues that are at play here. So one thing that I do want to point out is that I am using sort of some very particular definitions of nice and kind. For most people in most circumstances, there's probably a lot of overlap in what they mean when they use those two words. But one of the joys of having a language that has a giant lexicon is that you can, sort of grab related words and push them apart a little bit to draw distinctions. So that's where we're rolling here. Now, the idea of being nice and the idea of being kind, I think, are generally going to be very close as long as everybody's playing nice. Playing nice, that's not a very helpful phrasing. As long as everybody's sort of behaving well, then how nice people and how kind people respond are not going to be highly divergent. They're going to be pretty similar things. It's when people start behaving poorly that you start to see the differences. And I think those differences tend to come up around the setting of boundaries and sort of how you manage the group dynamics of people behaving poorly. So just some examples of both of those. So one example that comes up for me is one of my housemates at one point had a friend, their friend from high school or something like that, who came and visited here and was just, he was visiting San Francisco for the week, and so he's just going to crash on our couch. Hey, cool, right? That's awesome. But apparently at some point this guy decided that, hey, San Francisco's super rad. I don't like my living situation at home. I want to stay here. Okay, cool. Yeah, I totally support that. If your living situation at home is not that great, San Francisco's a great place to be. We got to, figure out a way for you to do that, though. And apparently this guy just decided that the plan was he would just sleep on our couch indefinitely. Not paying rent because he didn't have a job. He was just gonna stay there. And my housemate, whose friend he was, is a very nice person. And so really struggled with this because, of course, I personally don't want to manage his friend, right? That just doesn't seem like a thing that I should do, and it also feels sort of like overstepping bounds, right? Like, this is a guest, right? If there's something to be done there, he should be the one to do it. But it didn't work out. He's like, hey, dude, you gotta make some moves, and this guy's like, oh, yeah, I'm working on it, no progress. So, I think, about 2 weeks go by. And this is during a time when our landlord is actually actively trying to evict us over some nonsense, right? So we can't just have random people suddenly living in our house. And it finally came to a head. And so I sat this guy down and I said, hey, you can't be here. Period. Now, I've talked to you, your buddies talked to you. We've let you know that this is the deal. So if you need some help organizing where you're going to stay and trying to find a way to pivot from, where you are to something more sustainable in San Francisco, I'm here. I've got a whole afternoon free, right? And I've managed this sort of thing in my life in the past, right? So we can find you, some of the hostels that you can stay in, right? Very often they have a sort of work to stay program. We know some people who've gone that route in the past. So, I can make some calls, get some connections organized for you. But you can't stay here, right? Because we're going to get kicked out of our place. And then we don't get to stay in San Francisco. He's like, oh yeah, well, I think that, and I said, and so then this is where the distinction between nice and kind comes up, right? Because I'm motivated by a desire to see this fellow be able to live out the path that he wants to live out. If he doesn't like his living situation at home, I would love for him to be able to stay in San Francisco, right? But I've got to set a boundary because I have to take care of myself and my own living condition. And so I said to him, hey dude, here's the deal. If you're still here tonight, when I get home, I'm going to physically kick you out of here. I can beat you up, so just letting you know. So I would highly recommend that you take advantage of this right now. I will set you up so that you have a place to be that's safe and secure. I will take that I'll make that effort for you. But if you're unwilling to take advantage of that and you haven't successfully organized it for yourself, you're not staying here tonight. Period. Right? That's an unpleasant conversation to have with someone. But while I'm motivated by compassion, I don't have any problem with this guy. I don't want a bad outcome for him. I'm able to set that boundary and say, like, no, we go this far and no further. So make it happen. And ultimately, the way that he was behaving was putting a strain on his relationship with his friend who invited him to come stay. And his friend didn't have the tools in order to push this guy down a path that's going to work for him, but also preserve that relationship. So, and as far as I know, that ultimately this ended up being the end of it, right? So, for me, the path of greatest kindness is to put the boot to ass right there and say, hey, the way that you're behaving is unacceptable. I am willing to take the time to help you move to a different place, but I'm also willing to draw the line right here and make sure that you understand that this behavior will not continue. And I find that sort of nice people who are motivated by a fear of social consequences or interpersonal consequences really have difficulty doing that. And so you end up with this situation where people get walked all over. People see, adverse effects in their life because somebody else is taking advantage of the fact that they have this sort of absolute prohibition on taking steps that would upset people. So that's one example where setting boundaries where, at the extreme, the difference comes out. Another example, I had a housemate at one point. So this is more for sort of like behaviors that, behaviors that just aren't working for people, right? I had a housemate at one point who just, got like a nice colorful towel, and that was their towel, and it was stinking up the bathroom. And this is something that I dealt with as a young man myself. I went to like Target or something. I was like, this towel looks cool. All right. I got a couple of like colored towels. But when you're a young dude and you're a little bit funky and you don't do laundry quite often enough, the towels get a perma-funk in them that, if you can't bleach them because they're colored, then you're never going to get them totally unfunkified, right? And so this was playing out, and I was like, oh, well, this is awful. I'm unwilling to coexist with this, right? Grab the towel, walk over to this dude's door, like, hey, dude, this won't fly. This can't fly. So here's the issue, right? You need white towels, and you need to bleach them. So went over to my closet and was like, here's a towel to get you started, right? Here's a white towel to get you started, and I'm just going to clue you in on this fact, right? That if you have a colored towel and you're not doing like basically daily laundry, it's going to get funky. It's going to smell okay coming out of the dryer, and immediately as soon as you get that thing wet, it's going to start stinking again. That's going to be on you. That's going to affect how people want to interact with you, because you won't be able to smell it, but they will, and they're not going to, in life, they're not going to want to hang out with you, be your friend, all this kinds of stuff. So, let's nip this in the bud right here. And that was actually really well received, right? Because it's sometimes you just encounter unknown unknowns in your life. You didn't know that you didn't know a thing, right? It's like, it's a towel. Clearly, it gets me dry. This is a good scene, right? And so I think that's a situation where, the path of kindness was direct confrontation. Hey, you're fucking up, right? But let me show you, as somebody who's fucked up similarly in the past, how you can get out of this in a really easy way, and I'm going to take the first step for you. Like, here's a brand new white towel. Boom. You're ready to go. That's kind, but I think that somebody who is coming from an anxiety-driven, nice experience is going to have a very difficult time making that happen. Another place where this comes up is in sort of larger scale social dynamics, when you're dealing with somebody who has a behavior that is not popular. It doesn't quite rise to the level where it would be sort of individually objectionable. Like, nobody's going to step up and say, hey, stop that. And yet nobody likes it, right? And I've seen this play out a bunch of times. So, and gotten it wrong a bunch of times as well. So I usually become sort of the messenger in these sorts of situations, and it's very emotionally accessible for people to go, well, this guy doesn't like me, right? So he's just coming at me. And then later on down the road, when people are tired of this person's behavior and begin to exclude them from things, they go, oh, well, that person who doesn't like me must have turned these people against me. That's an accessible path for people to go down. And so it makes this sort of communication really hard. So one example of that, when I was a young fellow, there was this gal who sort of came into our social circle, and she was a cool gal, but so there's some personality clashes there and sort of inflamed some tensions that existed in our social circle. And a bunch of folks were getting together one day. I think we all went out to Denny's or something like that. We're just sitting around bullshitting, and it sort of turned into this airing of grievances session where everybody's like, well, I'm not really digging this person behaving this way. Oh, well, I don't think, all of this sort of thing. And this consensus formed. I'm just kind of sitting there watching, that everybody sort of said, well, what if we just sort of like ignore her and don't return her calls and whatnot, and she'll figure it out and just piss off, right? And everybody's like, yeah, that seems fine, just blow her off. Yeah, okay, cool. And everybody was kind of forming a consensus around that, and I was like, dude, that's really shitty. Like, why don't you just tell her what the issue that you have and give her a chance to sort it out. And that wasn't really a popular program. Nobody seemed really interested in doing that, which, these are a lot of nice people, right? And that's an uncomfortable communication. And so it sort of ended up being a situation where everybody sort of agreed that if I was willing to do that, then that was okay. And so I had to go take this person aside and say, like, hey, a lot of folks are sort of irritated with the way that you've been acting, and sort of everybody's at the point where they're willing to just kind of shun you. So I just want to let you know, these are the things that people are talking about. And these are, sort of the people who are having these issues if you want to talk to people. But, it's coming to a really kind of unpleasant place. And I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And that sucked super bad, actually. There's a lot of crying at that point. It was a deeply unpleasant sort of conversation to have, but it actually ended up having the outcome that this person was able to sort of look at what had been going on, realize how some things might have affected people that she didn't realize, and actually go talk to people and patch this up, and was a part of our social circle for some time after that. Eventually moved away, but was able to sort of keep her group of friends that were had sort of come to the consensus that she wasn't worth redeeming, and it was time for the shunning to begin. And that's a really unfortunate social dynamic that I've seen play out over and over and over again when you get a group of people who are nice in this sense of motivated by a fear of social consequences to avoid upsetting people, is that they don't have a way to deal with this sort of medium grade unpleasantness short of just reaching a point where everybody decides to exclude that person. And that's really not fun, because from the perspective of the person who's being excluded, they don't know what's going on because nobody's telling them about this behavior that's upsetting people, right? Everybody's like, oh yeah, it's fine. And then they don't have any friends. And that's really, really unpleasant. And my experience has been that it feels better to step in and say something than to watch that unfold and have not done anything. It's really, as somebody who's sort of on the sidelines watching somebody get shunned, like it's really unpleasant. You feel for that person. And if I was in that situation, I would want somebody to tell me, I've suspected on a number of occasions that I was somewhat in that situation because I can be a difficult person to interact with, and I sometimes marvel that entire groups of people put up with me for extended periods of time, but, I know that that's what I would want. So there's some examples from my life. I thought I would share one of my favorite things. So this is Markings. Dog Marking by Dag Hammarskjöld. Let's see if I can get this thing to focus. So Dag Hammarskjöld was I don't know, he's a Nordic fellow. I can't remember if he was Swedish or Danish or Norwegian. But he was the second Secretary General of the United Nations, and he was a low-key Christian mystic. And so he kept this journal of sort of his struggles in life. He was sort of an introverted, isolated person, and he really struggled a lot of times while outwardly presenting himself as, this sort of highly effective, capable, skilled, and ultimately sort of, I think a lot of people projected, fulfilled person. But he had a really hard time in general in life. And he has a passage in here where he's talking about dealing with a difficult subordinate, and the discovery of what that experience was like for the person who was presenting a problem. And I don't know that this is available anywhere online, so I'm going to read it, so you all have to deal with that. So here we go. He was impossible. It wasn't that he didn't attend to his work. On the contrary, he took endless pains over the tasks he was given. But his manner of behavior brought him into conflict with everybody and, in the end, began to have an adverse effect on everything he had to do with. When the crisis came, and the whole truth had to come out, he laid the blame on us. In his conduct, there was nothing, absolutely nothing, to reproach. His self-esteem was so strongly bound up, apparently, with the idea of his innocence, that one felt a brute as one demonstrated, step by step, the contradictions in his defense and, bit by bit, stripped him naked before his own eyes. But justice to others demanded it. When the last rag of a lie had been taken from him, and we felt there was nothing more to be said, out it came with stifled sobs. Out it came with stifled sobs. But why did you never help me? Why didn't you tell me what to do? You knew that I always felt you were against me. And fear and insecurity drove me further and further along the course you now condemn me for having taken. It's been so hard. Everything. One day, I remember, I was so happy. One of you said that something I had produced was quite good. So in the end, we were in fact to blame. We had not voiced our criticisms, but we had allowed them to stop us from giving him a single word of acknowledgement, and in this way we had barred every road to improvement. For it is always the stronger one who is to blame. We lack life's patience. Instinctively, we try to eliminate a person from our sphere of responsibility as soon as the outcome of this particular experiment by life appears, in our eyes, to be a failure. But life pursues her judgments far beyond the limitation. I screwed up that last line there. But life pursues her experiments far beyond the limitations of our judgment. This is also the reason why, at times, it seems so much more difficult to live than to die. He's a gloomy fellow. But he has a really great insight there, which is that if we don't have the resources within ourselves to make our criticisms known, and we allow that social dynamic to unfold where people are excluded, it makes for some really unpleasant situations, and it's really unkind to the person who is ultimately excluded by that. So failing to upset them by giving voice to our criticisms, when we know that they're shaping our behavior and the behaviors of others, it's really a deeply unkind path. Like I said, I've mismanaged this particular interaction many times. I've lost friends that I wish I didn't lose over having these conversations. And it is very difficult to be sometimes the person who is motivated by kindness but not nice. It can be unpleasant, but I think it feels better in the long run to have given voice to that criticism, to have tried to create every opportunity for somebody to receive the information that the way that they're behaving is going to have adverse social consequences for them, than to stand by and do nothing and leave that person in a position where they don't even know they're walking down a path that's going to have a bad end for them. So that's a little bit more expanding on this idea of the difference between being nice and being kind, and how that's come up in my life. So I hope that that's a little bit useful to Lucy and to everyone else. And yeah, that's it. If you leave comments and questions, I will respond to them. So please like, comment, subscribe, all the stuff that you're supposed to say as a YouTuber. Cheers.